What is up, grinders? Welcome to an MMA Crunch Time Before Lock. I am your host, Mike Brown, aka H3 Buddha, here with my pal, Squirrel Patrol. Squirrel, we have 13 fights, Apex, and it all comes down to the main event. It's going to be, how are you handling this main event? It's sad that these, sloppy, lower, middle, I don't know. They're both ranked guys, right? But we both know how sloppy this fight could get. So crazy cards, some women's fights, some high actions fights. I think it's hard to target a fight that you can't or you don't want to play on this slate.
Yeah, I agree. We had that question on the expert survey, and it was a tough one this week. And the main event is an interesting one. I think it's going to be overowned, but there's like a push and pull because it's I think it's going to be overowned. But it's priced in the mid-range. So if there's not like a first-round finish, it could score poorly, in which case you don't need to have it. The problem is like Tybura has like pretty good first-round finish odds. Tuivasa has pretty good first-round finish odds, and like priced at like 8,200 in the mid-range. It's tough to get away from. So I think it's just like any other fight on the card, and sometimes we see that with like heavyweight main events like Rosenstruck and Gamiev a few weeks ago. The problem is, even if you look at it as just another fight, it's like probably not going to go 5 rounds, right? Like if it's just another fight on the card, but it's kind of appealing because it's priced in the mid-range and one of the fighters has a pretty good chance of getting an early finish.
And I bet you probably agree. I mean, there's fights right around it that, easily 100, 105 to 110 points that are around it. So with that context of the slate is tricky because I could definitely see everyone's starting with a piece of the main event. And we might as well start with a Tuivasa, 50% owned. This guy doesn't score until he gets the knockout. That's the problem for me. It's like there's a lot more tools for Tybura in the back pocket. I could even see an instance where you see Tybura go out there, shoot a takedown in the first, hold him against the cage for the first, and then it just negates it. Like there's ends up being that second round finish, third, fourth. What do you think the range of outcomes are on this fight? Because they seem to be wide, but I feel like the deeper the fight goes, that just leads to Tybura scoring and Tuivasa probably relying on a lucky knockout later on.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not really interested in playing this one for like the volume over 5 rounds, right? So I think Tuivasa is showing up. He's showing up as one of our highest owned fighters, and I think he's going to be one of the most over-owned. Like this is a coin flip matchup, like absolute coin flip. Some of the slates have a slight edge to Tuivasa, but it's a lot of like minus 110 on both sides. Some like minus 115 Tuivasa, minus 105 Tybura, that kind of thing. Essentially a coin flip, and so it's fascinating to see Tuivasa with so much more ownership than Tybura. But it makes sense because like Tuivasa can get that first round finish. His odds for a first round finish, I think, are between 25 and 30%. I'm seeing 28% implied odds in my little conversion calculator thing. But I don't like. I think I want to like roster him at a rate closer to that 28% first round finish odds. Not really like. Way above that, like that near the 50% ownership that we have. Just because, there's so many chances where, like, if he gets a, second round, third round win with very low volume, that's like that might not land on the winning lineup, even with the mid range pricing. The problem, I wish the odds were heavier on either side because it's the mid range pricing, I think, that really makes this one able to land on the winning lineup, not the fact that it's the main event.
That's where dynamic pricing would be different, right? Like realistically, Tuivasa would probably be, if not the most expensive, right up there in that 9K. So he's minus 115 inside the distance. And, you got the direct leverage on Tybura at like plus 115 as well, if you want to go that direction. But we'll kind of mix in that main event talk throughout the context of the show. And
actually,
go ahead.
I'll just bring up 2 quick points. You brought up the dynamic pricing. We usually do have like a very heavy DraftKings focus, but FanDuel does price up both sides of the main event. That makes this fight particularly unappealing on FanDuel because it's priced up for 2 fighters that are 50-50 and are not going to be particularly high volume. So it actually is a little bit unappealing on FanDuel. And then like with the leverage on Tybura, I kind of thought the same thing, but actually because like Tybura might not score well no matter what. So maybe the answer rather than leverage on Tuivasa. Like the leverage on Tuivasa might be just skipping the main event, not necessarily trying to go overweight on title.
Precisely. Yeah. Good point. I honestly was going to bring that up a little bit later on, that I was probably a smaller field stuff. I might just fade the main event because there's just too much ownership. And we'll talk about this range. We might as well start in it because, how do you think lineups are going to be made this week? Because I can see one of two things. I can see the two punts to try to get up top and get a little bit of the mid-range love. There's these plays that people are going to want to gravitate towards from like 9 to like 85, and then there's that dead heat middle range. So how was the Sims tool, if you played around with it, looking at lineups, and then how are you probably going to be mixing things up in GPP?
So I think a lot of people are going to start their lineup with Kennedy Njoku, just because he's the highest priced fighter on the slate. He's got the best win odds. He's got great odds for a first round finish. The problem is he's also fairly low volume and like a notoriously slow starter, as Liam pointed out in his article. He's also, I don't think he's somebody, in his UFC career that has gotten a first round finish. So the first round finish odds may be more of a they're a reflection of the fact that Kennedy can get a knockout, but it might be more a reflection of OSP and his age, and like his the state of his career at this point is as a grizzled veteran of the UFC. That it's probably there's a chance Kennedy Njoku can get him out there with one punch. The problem is if he's the highest owned fighter and he's low volume and he doesn't get that first round finish, like suddenly you're looking at a lot of dead lineups.
You missed out on one thing, Squirrel. He was knocked out his last fight.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of trust. This is the state of MMA in 2024, right? We're investing in heavy favorites after losses. There's bounce back spots. I think people see what the UFC, what the matchmakers are looking at, right? They say, okay, we have OSP, who's been a grizzled veteran, like you said, a guy that will go in there. Either he's kill or be killed. And especially at this stage, he just doesn't tend to have a chin. I mean, Felipe Lins, we saw what he couldn't do to Ian Cutelaba last week, right?
Yeah.
and he just murks OSP. I don't know if he's got that chin. And like you said, it's tough to even get behind Kennedy when it's like a second round finish. It's just he waits. He's got that nice long reach. So I understand people are going to start their lineups. Where else are they going? If they're going from Kennedy, are they staying up top? Are they going mid after that? Because once you put him in, your salary just falls off. It's like you really have to get a 2-dog type lineup.
Yeah, I think the guy that the favorite that people are going to go to next, I think, is Bulgarian. And that makes that's a little bit easier to see because he's cheaper, right? Like he's 8,500, I think. Let me make sure. He's 8,500. So he has a much greater margin of error than Njoku has, because he can win a not so high paced decision and still land on the winning lineup at 8,500 if we don't see a ton of underdogs win. And there's no particular reason to think he's going to be low paced, right? He's coming off of a first round win. So, he could get a first round knockout. His odds are decent for 8,500. So I think that's where most people are going to go after Kennedy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought too. It's all right, Kennedy, piece of main event, and then Bulgarian. Bulgarian also, I think, is one of those guys that you bet into an unknown. I think last time out against Marshall, 7,700. We're probably not going to see that price tag again, right? 122 points. He's an all-action fighter. We don't know what we're going to see down the stretch. Like you said, that margin of error ends up being wider. And what happens if he's a good wrestler? What happens if he uses his size against Rodriguez, who C-Rod had to move up because he's been missing weight? It's we don't know. He's been a prospect killer. Last two fights, absolutely, exposed Rosas Jr., who everybody loved. And Simon was one of my personal favorite prospects. But he doesn't actually score all that well. He's more control-based than going out there to finish. So I was hoping Rodriguez would be popular, but he's not. So it's frustrating there. But you talk about that particular range. There's a fight that I think I really, really like. And I don't know if people are going to necessarily go here because Fialho and Osborne, people want this lower weight class, but I'm going to throw a little curveball to you. What about Culibao and Silva, man? This Silva guy looks like from Contender Series, there was 200 plus strikes. If you looked at his score in Contenders, let me pull it up here on the side screen. Imagine this score scroll. 1 knockdown, 204 strikes, 2 takedowns in like 2 minutes of control time. Over 3 rounds. We'd sign up for that all day.
I think it's fantastic that that's not on the game log, right? Like if you click on his DraftKings thing, it doesn't show that because it was a Contender Series fight. That is an absurd amount of volume. I think he's a really interesting cash option because like he's an underdog, but like he has decent chances of of winning. But then like what if he just gets that volume and like then gets one punch from Culibao and gets knocked out? Like that's fine for your like kind of underdog puntish play in cash. I think he's a great tournament option because what if he gets that win? Like what if he does get that high volume win? The volume won't necessarily translate, right? Like, but the guy he was fighting there in that Contender Series fight was like I think Angel Pacheco, who's like also signed with the UFC. So it wasn't like a nothing prospect that he did that to. So I don't know. Like I think Silva can win this fight, and I don't think because of the total lack of game log, I think people are like skipping over him. Like, oh, he's like an underdog. He's one of these guys in the 7,000s. I don't like Penny Kanzat or whatever, Danny Silva or what. Like, no, you want Danny Silva.
I was hoping you'd say that because think of it, right? We've been talking about this over the last few weeks where you have these fighters that are just all action. And what happens is you have fighters that have horrible scoring logs. There's actually 2 on this slate. Culibao is one of them. Moises is another guy. But when you're forced into those scoring opportunities at single digit, do you believe this? I mean, we're showing right now 7, say 8% ownership for Culibao. I mean, in an all action fight, his ownership should be north of 20%.
Yeah, actually, I think that's really good, like kind of X's and O's, right? Because Culibao does look like somebody you don't want to roster that much of like, oh, he's like a lower volume, higher priced guy. But no, like Danny Silva and the missing game log makes Culibao more interesting because Culibao is going to have to do something, and Culibao's favored to win this fight. And we know Danny Silva is not going to be doing nothing, right? So like Culibao is going to have to do something. Like I'm interested in being over the field on this fight like dramatically because I think people are not going to go there because of like the previous statistics or lack thereof. But like this should be an action fight.
The flyweights. People want to go to that fight.
And like this is something that the numbers either don't tell you anything or are going to lead you astray. Because there's a chance that this is one of the fights that you really need to have, and there's no numbers there that like back that up, but like the tape obviously does. Or like if you have to go to like Danny Silva's like Contender Series, stats, which people aren't going to look at, but you can actually click on it from like the ESPN profile. They have some of the Contender Series game logs, and when I click on that, I was like, oh my God, 200 significant strikes. Like, look at these takedowns and knockdowns. Like you might see like a bunch of takedowns sometimes or a knockdown, or a bunch of significant strikes. You don't see all of those together. Like, that would have been a massive DraftKings score.
Yeah, just right away. I mean, 80 points just built in for significant strikes, nothing else. Oh, amazing. Let's talk about that fight right below. And I mentioned, I think it's going to absorb a lot of ownership. Gial Fialho and Ode Osborne. This is one of those prototypical fights on a slate that, we didn't just uncover a little bit of gold with Culibao, right? Like Fialho is one of those guys you want to get behind. And then you cannot count out Ode Osborne. The guy actually has some power for the division. We know that flyweight's not necessarily always getting a lot of knockouts, but he somewhat does nothing until he scores points. So it's a little bit of a worrisome thing, but there's potentially some leverage with him. I see that perhaps you tagged him in your survey. Fialho's side of things is more of the power grappling, take you down, submit you type of guy. I just think that there's more opportunity for the fight to bust. I know we're both tagged it, right? So we're both on opposite sides, but I still feel like this one might be more apt to be slower paced due to Osborne, right? Like he slows the fights down, and then you have that Fialho that's in his face. So I don't know. Something's going to have to give in this fight.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to end up underweight Fialho and overweight on Osborne. But like being underweight Fialho scares me a little bit because the question is, does he get like a takedown and some control time and the win. And that, let's say he gets like a takedown in the first and a couple minutes control time, takedown in the second, a couple minutes of control time, and a submission. Like that's probably not going to score great for his price. And he's priced over Kulabau. He's like 8,700. So he's not the most expensive guy, but he's not the cheapest, of the favorites. I'm more interested in Osborne. The line's actually been moving a little bit in his direction. So his win probability is now a little bit over 40%, which is not really that, that's pretty good for 7,500. He's 7,500. Got like about a 1 in 7 chance of a first round finish. Again, that's not terrible. So he's not a bad fighter to get to at 7,500. I think you're getting more for your $7,500 on DraftKings with Odi Osborne than you normally do because of that little bit of line movement. But Fialho is a little bit scary because what if it's not like if Osborne keeps getting up and Fialho keeps getting takedowns?
Who was the guy last week? 9 takedowns. It was against CJ Vergara, right? The Kazaki guy, right? Like Abu, whatever his name is.
Almabayev, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just incredible. Like that was the hidden scoring, right? Like we didn't necessarily think CJ was getting up. That was the problem. It's like he was overweight for that fight. Osborne's gritty, but it's like, is he just going to try to play guard and slap him a little? Like there's a lot of scoring that's possible. But then when it stood back up and it's the second round, Osborne clocks him. You're like, well, what did I just sign up for?
Yeah. And like if at 7,500, if Osborne gets like the 1-punch win in the second round or something, like that's not, again, I get 7,500. He's got more to work with, right? I'm much happier with like a few, like a few punch knockdown finish in the second round with Odi Osborne than like a low scoring win by Fialho. So like Fialho's a guy I'll probably end up underweight on because I have to make decisions somewhere. Not that I just don't like because he could score well.
Yeah, no, I 100% understand. Now, do you want to stay in this middle range or do you want to talk about your favorite? And I think the fall off point is like 7,300 down because you like this range typically, but for this particular slate, I don't know. Like, Anne Hellinger is probably the most. I mean, honestly, I don't hate playing Kianzad because of the ownership, and Macy's been literally hurt before and hurt from a up kick. But at the same time, it's like Brian Barberina looks terrible. Levy's in a spot against a highly skilled guy. Ramirez is against a late note. Well, Ramirez is late notice, and we have Moises is the top 15 type guy, and then we talked about OSP, right? Like, do you want to talk about this range? You want to stay in the middle? What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed the pricing with like below 7,300. I don't have a ton of interest. You can always make an argument in that range for owning the fighters, like rostering them at about their win percentage. That's pretty low in some of these cases. Like OSP has like I think less than a 1 in 6 chance of winning the fights. So I don't know. I could it's worth a flyer if you're doing 150 lineups. You should have some of that. You never know what's going to happen. We've seen like medical disqualifications. Below 7,000. At 7,000 or below, they really just need any kind of win, even some kind of win where they it is like a medical disqualification. We've seen that guys getting punched in the back of the head so many times that that he wins the fight. So yeah,
they're dogs for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to go crazy. I'll have some of these guys below 7,300. I'll have them in my 150 set, maybe in like smaller field, like one of them in one lineup. But no, I get 7,300 and above is where I'm really interested. And
that's the number 70.
Yeah, we have a bunch of these fighters that are at about 1+150. And that's interesting to me because I think a lot of people look at that and go, well, underdog, I'm not interested. But like +150, you're at about a 40% chance of winning the fight. Like that is closer to a coin flip than I think people will realize. And so like in the lower, middle range, we have some good options. I mean, like some guys that have really good chance of winning their fight.
You like how I worded it? I'm like, you want to stay in the range where you and I both want to be, or you want to go down below? Let me just talk on, I guess, two guys. I mean, Kianzad is going to have to be like a meme-like finish, I think, to really win her fight, because I just think skill for skill, Tuivasa has a higher ceiling still in the UFC, where Panny's kind of fanning out let's just say, and she'd be more like striking base, like I said, meme-like finish. And Hellinger, nice leverage, I'd say. Like if he's getting a wrestling-based finish, I think it would be great. And then Barberina, man, I loved Barberina's hidden scoring over the years, and people would not look into him, and is certainly not going to look into him now. And at 7,100, I'm talking about buy low. I don't know if this is the buy low spot. The problem is he's got GM3, who has been hurt to the body. He doesn't follow a game plan. He doesn't have aggressive wrestling either, and he's going to need to get that aggressive wrestling going because Barberina's kink in the armor has been his takedown defense. But like I said, I'll say it again. Barberina's been a hidden scorer for us in the past. That sheer volume, the sneaky control time. So I don't count him out, but I also agree with you that it's just I don't want to invest in the 7,300 in the smaller field or the high dollar stuff.
Yeah, I just I like Barberina in terms of the volume, and like I agree, if he wins, it's probably going to score well. So you make an argument for owning him like near his win probability. The problem is I just don't think he's going to win the fight.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, like if I have only 7,100 left, then yeah, I would take Barberina. I think he's a viable underdog, like reasonable underdog. But it's just risky because like his chances of winning the fight, are I think a little bit less than 1 in 3. So that's not great. And then I think like right above him, like I think I have Enhelliger with about 40% implied probability to win. Barberina at about 30%, at only a $200 difference. Like that's a pretty big jump.
My problem for Enhelliger is the age. I mean, Gregorio might just be too fast, too smooth on the feet, avoid the grappling situations where I think Enhelliger might need to go, which is great for scoring purposes, right? But it might be one of those situations where he gets a takedown the first and then gets smoked in the second round or third round, and there's just not a lot to be had for fantasy purposes. And there's going to be a guy that's I think going to be higher owned than what it says. I believe you tagged him, Mike Davis, 28%. That's going to be higher. I mean, if you look at his game logs, I have to think people are going to be going here 9,200. He's arguably one of the better point per dollars out there in fantasy scoring, volume based control, offensive wrestling. But I got to tell you, as the week's gone on, I'm thinking to myself, there's a few things here. Levy is a guy who goes in and tries to take you down at will. Like that's what he's done in the UFC. I don't see why he's not going to try to test his wrestling against Mike Davis here. And you have Mike Davis. What did he do last night? He was at an IMAX theater watching I think it was Kung Fu Panda. Okay. I don't want to put real life money on a guy that's going to Kung Fu Panda in IMAX the night before, John. I mean, you tagged him. I'm just saying he's going out. And he even said the chairs were awesome and stuff. They're shaking around. He had a lot of fun. So, I mean, he could have a lot of fun scoring you a lot of fantasy points. But if he's getting controlled for any bit of this fight, that scoring starts falling off a cliff.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to read the Kung Fu Panic thing. Maybe he was like looking into martial arts.
He had a soda and popcorn. I had sources there.
All right, interesting. Soda's not a good sign. Like if he's not taking the diet seriously. But no, I mean he's still got a better than 75% chance of winning the fight. I agree. I think Nathan Levy is interesting leverage. That's why you want to probably roster every fighter. If you're doing 150 lineups, maybe we should take this as a sign that Mike Davis is relaxed, confident going into the fight. Pretty sure he's going to rack up a big DraftKings score.
Skill for skill, he's way better in light years above Levy. So I got to give you that, right? We know that. I just worry about people getting sucked into those game logs because Levy is the direct type of mold to stall out the scoring in the fight. So I feel like people will want to go here and then they're going to go, how come he just scored 85 points? Like 85 isn't enough.
Yeah. The issue is he's not like the most expensive fighter either. I think if he was the most expensive fighter on the card, that would be an issue. I think more people are going to go to Njoku than Mike Davis, and my read is that Davis can outscore him. Kennedy in a win. So maybe the ownership flips, and then that's the wrong call. Because sure, Kennedy Njoku get the first round knockout, and then and Nathan Levy could stall out Mike Davis. I'm just going to go with our projected ownership, which shows like Davis lower owned. I agree. It could be I think Meg Davis will be higher owned than like 29%, just because of that game log, right? If you click on like, unlike Danny Silva, Mike Davis's like high action game log is right there for everybody to see. If you click on his name in DraftKings, so I agree. I think Davis will probably be higher owned than 29% or whatever, but still, like he's heavily favored to win this fight, and if he does, there is a good chance it's going to be a decent score. So.
On YouTube, we have I love the IMAX narrative. Hey, we need boots on the ground. Was he drinking soda? My source, a little wishy-washy. We'll see how that ends up being. But yeah, I mean, right above Mike Davis is Thiago Moises with a late notice Mitch Ramirez. And I feel like this fight is just a weird one to read because you have a Thiago Moises who doesn't score like I talked about. But is Mitch Ramirez going to have to come out here and try to bull rush Thiago Moises? I believe Liam said it on our Ground and Pound podcast behind the paywall. Make sure you guys are listening to that, because if Mitch Ramirez is coming in here guns blazing, that's going to mean scoring for Moises, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a case where, like, Thiago Moises, usually more like a submission guy, I feel like, and isn't necessarily going to be throwing up a ton of volume on the feet. And that's not necessarily a fighter we would like to target all the time at really expensive prices. The problem is he's fighting a guy that might not really belong in the UFC, like a late notice replacement. If the skill level isn't there, and Mitch Ramirez like tries to get like an early finish, he figures he'll off down like one round, maybe get a finish or something like that, then maybe Thiago Moises does end up putting up a very high score for him, and then you need to have him. Our sim results like hate Moises.
I figured, but those are the hidden scorings that we were talking about, right? Like by the numbers, he's not a point per dollar guy.
Yeah, they're showing him over-owned by like a 2-to-1 margin almost. But I agree. I think that is slightly off because it's not like that simulation isn't necessarily reading like the Mitch Ramirez. Like Ramirez may try to go in there, try to push the pace and not be able to, and be outskilled and get finished in the first round.
Remember the last time he did it on the Contender Series? I'm sure you're game log hunting. He got knocked down in the second round. 30 significant strikes against him. Yeah. I mean, they would have scored decent.
Yeah, and like sometimes these fights are not high scoring until the last 30 seconds, and then somebody's just racking up a ton of significant strikes until the ref steps in. And so that's what makes UFC DFS hard to predict. Is the scoring doesn't always work out the way we think it will ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a middle range women's fight that is going to go under-owned, and contextually, I think is going to be important for the slate after this ad read. A combo 3-day pass. Ever wanted to take RG Premium for a test run? Now you can with a 3-day trial pass. Get access to every sport except NASCAR at a low price of $19.99. There's never been a better time to join the RG community. Find the 3-day trial code in the description below and sign up today. Now, you talked about this middle range being important. I talked about a women's fight that's important. There's actually two, but I think there's one that's going to be a little bit more than the other, and that's the Amaram versus McKenna. I'm more apt to play this fight at that low ownership, and I'll tell you why. You got the rare case here where you have a underdog, and it's my favorite thing in DFS MMA, at favored odds to win inside the distance compared to the favorite. We have Amaran as a plus 145 underdog squirrel. But what is that inside the distance? Earlier on in the week, it was like plus 190. It's gone up a little. It's about plus 200. But you're talking about McKenna plus 400 inside the distance. That's wild. I mean, we rarely see that. And she's minus 170. I figured throughout the week, a little bit of safety. People would want to go towards McKenna. Ownership-wise, you have a little bit of money coming in on her, right? Everything was pointing to me that she's a first-click cash play. I love leverage. I love somebody that's going to go out there and fight for my money. My problem with Amaram, and you're going to have to agree, is she might pull guard. She might give up that top position. She might be fishing for a submission off her back. Therefore, is she a good play? Is she a bad play? I think it's a very interesting context to this slate.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. because I think I as soon as I saw that she had better like first round finish odds than McKenna, I thought of you. The problem with this one is that it's not necessarily going to be like sometimes in the men's fights, it's like, oh, this guy might get like a first round like knockdown finish or something like that. Rack up some volume on some ground and pound or whatever. Emery, it's less likely to be that. It's more likely to be a first round submission or an inside the distance submission, which isn't necessarily going to score that well. But it's really hard to predict. I agree. This is maybe the women's fight I'm least interested in, actually. But I'm interested in all three of them. I think you could actually sell me on all three of the women's fights landing in the optimal lineup.
I think the ceiling is interesting from grappling here solely, because we'll talk about the Nunes and Chandler and how that could be volume based more than finish equity. I don't know. I mean, we can just continue to mix it in. It's just, I think McKenna and Amaranth, if McKenna was higher owned, I'd be way, way, way higher on Amaranth, because is she a cash play? I mean, she's got the equity. We look at it's like, it's glaring. It's 60% compared to above her, Tuivasa. Is she a cash play, McKenna?
Yeah, I think you can play her in cash. I don't know if she'll be that highly owned, though. Because I think a lot of the underdogs are viable. So I think you can go like for a cash game line for like two lower priced underdogs that still have about a 40% chance to win. And then you're skipping McKenna and going like it's only a $300 difference between like McKenna, I think, and Dulgarian. And I think people are just going to go to Dulgarian.
Interesting. Yeah. So we talked about the other women's fight right in this range. We have Josiane Nunes and Chelsea Chandler. Striker versus grappler. My problem is like Nunes throws volume for days. The optics last time out of Chandler just running away from the strikes was hilarious. So, I mean, she can score, man. Her first debut fight, 111 points. She can go for takedowns. She's a vicious woman. She's looking to finish pillar to post. I just feel like it might just be too competitive. Like when this fight's competitive, it falls off a cliff personally from my viewpoint on scoring. I feel like you're going to want this fight though.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to this fight. So Josiane Nunes is 5'2". Chelsea Chandler, I think, is 5'8". So it's one of the bigger height differences we've seen. The reach is only a 1 inch reach. Just 1 inch difference between them. But I was thinking about last week, we had Robelis Despaigne. He's like 6'7", and everybody was talking about his height. Like, oh my god, we're going to see this like 6'7" fighter in the octagon. But like Nick Parkin is 6'4", so it's only a 3 inch like height difference. Like, imagine if this was a men's fight and it was like Chris Chandler and he's 6'8" against like Jose Nunez, who's 6'2". Like the odds would be much wider. I agree. Like Josiane Nunes can throw high volume. She can get a knockout. Like she throws hard. But like Chelsea Chandler's got a huge height, like a huge height difference here, and she didn't make weight either. And the fight is still going on, so she's got a big size advantage here. I kind of like Chelsea Chandler. I don't mind going to Nunez, but I like being able to
mean that there's stalling ability if it's competitive. I'm trying to talk you through this. I know you want this fight, but let me give you my thought process. She's just too big and she stays on the outside. Like Nunez has to crash in. There's ability for her to just tie her up with these long limbs, and there's not a lot to be had. It is tricky. That's just the state of what our the cards were dealt every slate now, right? Like Nunez is just a scorer. It's just 75 points last time out against Zara Farn. I mean, Farn stinks, dude. Farn is not UFC level.
But who was? I think it might have been Blender that was saying like, yeah, she was like not able to reach the chin of of Farn because she's so short, right? She's 5'2". So I don't know. It'll be an interesting fight.
We have in chat Chandler fade the main event or Tybura, like. Straight up, will you think Tybura versus Chandler essentially?
It's a tough call because like you should probably take Tybura, but I don't know if he loses and Chandler wins. I like Tybura's going to see much higher ownership because he'll be he's the main event fighter, main event underdog. I don't think Chandler. I kind of put this in my blurb. I don't think Chandler will actually see that 17% ownership. It'll be an interesting test of like how many people really watch UFC because like the optics of her last fight, like, if you saw her last fight, you're probably not clicking on her at a 17% rate. So yeah, I don't know. I like Chandler is the much riskier play, but yeah, if you want to go for somebody low owns in that price range, I think Chandler is interesting.
Let me talk to you about a high owned fight, an all action fight, a guy who goes in there on his sword and he wants to be killed or he will kill you at any time. That's Brian Battle. Brian Battle's in a co-main event spot here against Ons Lusa, man. And Ons Lusa, actually both guys fantasy relevant, let's be honest, right? Like they're both fantasy scorers in goodness for us. But that last fight for Ons Lusa is really firmly stuck in my head because against Reese McKee, he should just stick to that game plan, hold him down, control him. But he's getting hit and hit hard deep into that third round. And what does Brian Battle do? This guy just goes pillar to post. I'm going to kill you. I mean, unless you're an OV that's going to hold him down, right? Like a Fakhretdinov or any of those Russian guys in control, he's scoring you 100 plus points. He's got knockdowns. He's got sneaky control time. This is a really fun fight. There's just a lot of ownership on this fight, John.
Yeah, but it's it's pretty high paced, so it might deserve some of that ownership. Angelusa has always catches my eye when a guy can get 100 points in a decision win, like a 3-round decision, because that's like volume in some way that can score well. So, and then at an underdog price tag, but he's not some super absurd long shot. I think Angelusa is a great play at the lower range. He's a great underdog option. He's going to be one of the higher owned. Seeing like 31%. That seems about right. Yeah, he's one of the guys that our sim tool kind of likes. So he's one of the underdogs that the sim tool likes best, and probably because of that volume. And then Brian Battle isn't necessarily like a low paced fighter either. He's the favorite in the fight. So I think he's a good option as well. I like both of these fighters. I wouldn't hesitate to put either one of these guys in a lineup.
A glaring stat was 100% takedown defense for Alan Salusa. That was very surprising to me when I was looking at the numbers. And like you said, the volumes here, I don't know like who they're trying to push here, right? Are they trying to show Lusa in the new market? Are they trying to give Brian Battle, the Ultimate Fighter guy, a shot? Like it's a weird spot to be pushed up the card. But I mean, I understand it too. Like, both guys are going to go for it. At least that's going to happen. Any final takeaways before we get out of here? Because, there's a lot of ways to go in building your lineups. I'm just going to tell you, I'm plugging my nose, man. I'm going to probably fade the main event, and I'm terrified of it. Like, you can build comfortable lineups fading, but that uncomfortability is being like, no, one strike can end this thing and give you 90 plus points.
Yeah, and you've got that thing where your DraftKings app is going to say you're winning a bunch of money until the main event. But I agree. I think the main event will be overowned. You can go for the volume in this one. And it's a really wide open card, and so that makes it interesting. Like there are very few fighters that are totally out of it for me. So wide open card. Don't be afraid to take anybody here because it's lower level. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And, we're supposed to just win TJ money. That's what we're supposed to do. It sounds like he might have had that Chandler or Tybura. So he's thinking, right? He's thinking, how do I differentiate? If I go to Chandler and she gets 115 points, I think he might be happy, right? Like 110 points, he's thrilled.
Yeah, exactly. And it's possible. She's done it before. So she's gotten like a ground and pound finish before. She got like a reversal against Stoliarenko, so it's possible. It's in the cards.
Yeah, and just in chat, we had, didn't Chiasson beat Kianzad before? Yes, she did.
Yeah.
In 2018, rear naked choke. So the low ownership has me on Chiasson, but it's also at the same time, I feel like people know where the ownership's going on this slate, right? Like you can get crafty, just people are going to be overthinking the ownership.
Maybe. I like kind of like Chiasson because she could be pretty high volume. And she's got pretty strong odds to win the fight. So I think she's not somebody that's necessarily going to get that first round knockout, right? But she can put up the volume and get you a score. So it's definitely not a fighter that I'm looking to fade.
Yep, and the final thing where we know what's going to happen, GM3 is going to go out there with his D1 wrestling, take Barberina down like 4 times, and then submit him in the first round deep and score like 135 points. And we're all like, why? Like, why do the 40% unnecessary? Oh, these guys are frustrating, man. It is. It's just the state of MMA. But next week we end up having a pretty decent fight card. I believe we had maybe one fall off. I think it was 14 fights going into last night, for next week. But we're at 13 fights. Rebos versus Namajunas. A women's main event. We haven't had that in a while, I don't think, right? And top to bottom, going to be an interesting card. But make sure you give the show a like. You have a little bit of time to build lineups, about 2 hours, but we appreciate you viewing. For TJ, for Squirrel Patrol, myself, we're out of here.